Okay, thank you. Thank you everybody for joining us this evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Frances Guy. I'm chair of the panel of the judges for the British Kuwait Friendship Society Book Prize. And I'm going to do my best to try and compare this event to some extent, at least. And as you've probably noticed, we'll be recording and we are also live streaming. So if you're uncomfortable with that, probably this is the moment to switch your camera off, but please keep it on. It would be better if you did. Firstly, let me tell you how sorry we are not to be holding this prize-giving ceremony in person in Kuwait for the 25th anniversary. We had planned to do so, and I'm very grateful to all of you who started making plans to join us in Kuwait. But unfortunately, the tragic situation in Palestine and Israel remains very fluid, and we decided it was probably prudent at the time to move ourselves online. And I thank you all for bearing with us. And I'm sure that we all wish and pray for a speedy and peaceful end to this terrible catastrophe that's continuing. For this evening, we will have a few introductory remarks, and then we will hear from this year's winners, and hopefully we will have time for a few questions and answers from the audience. So I hope you'll feel free to join in the conversation. And please use the chat function if you would prefer, or raise your hand or whatever. Very happy to make this as fluid a conversation as possible. It's my pleasure to start the proceedings more formally, to hand over to His Excellency Mr. Badr Mohammed Al Awadi, Ambassador of the State of Kuwait to the Court of St. James and Chairman of the British Kuwait Friendship Society. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Frances. I really appreciate it. On the occasion, I will read it to be much better than talking, because I don't want to make the mistake. I want to be accurate. On the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the Book Prize and the Middle East Studies, I would like to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to Abdullah Al Mubarak Foundation for their endowment, and particularly Sheikh Mubarak Al Abdullah Mubarak Al Sabah for his effort and unwavering support for the British Kuwait Friendship Society, and for his wise decision to move the book prize this ceremony and this year to virtually, allowing all to participate. I know the situation is not easy for all of us, and I pray for peace, as you mentioned, Frances, and our heart is really in sad moment now. We live in very sad moment, and hope we pray for peace always, and to protect all civilians in all the world. I also would like to extend my gratitude to the ambassador of the UK, Ms. Brenda Lewis, for her support, as well as the chair judge, Her Excellency Frances Guy, whose commitment to the prize must be commended, as well as the endless hours of dedication to review the candidates. I would also like to take the opportunity to congratulate Ms. Janet Afari and Kaman Afari, authors of this year winning book, Mullah Nasruddin, and I hope to meet him soon in London in the summer, as she promised me. As Ambassador of State of Kuwait, I wish to continue the success of the prize and its contribution to mutual understanding and to strengthening our cultural relation. And that moment, exactly that way we talk about, all of us nowadays, we always think to strengthen our relation and culture. I think is the best way to bring peace together. And I think what Sheikh Mubarak doing here and having this prize and this ceremony, it's part of our effort collectively together to put our hand together to bring peace and calm and stability everywhere. I think always, I believe in my experience around the world, always culture bring peace. Always we get together and sit and exchange our culture experience. It's always bring peace. It's always bring dialogue and talk, and that's why we all looking forward. And thank you very much, Sheikh Mubarak, for bringing us today, and for all the participants, because I believe that the cooperation culture field is very important for what we are all pray for the peace. Thank you very much for all of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I note that we have a number of former prize winners in the audience, so I'm really very grateful for everybody for coming. And some of you will have heard a little bit of this before, but it's good to set the context.
It's very nice. Yeah.
The prize is a celebration of scholarly work on the Middle East in the widest sense, in that we include studies on Turkey and Iran, as well as on Islamic studies. And each year we receive about 50 submissions that reflect that whole range of subjects. And this year was no exception. We had books on contemporary issues like climate change in the Middle East. We had historical works on the Mamluks and the Mongols. We had books about 19th century and 20th century preoccupations and occupations in the Levant, and a book about the spread of Islam across the Indian Ocean, and many others. This diversity makes reading the submissions a joy, a fascination, but it also makes the selection of winners very challenging. And to help us, we have the support of a number of specialized anonymous reviewers who I would like to thank for their commitment over all of these 25 years to the prize. The criteria we're looking for when in selection are originality, clarity and accessibility, importance to the field, as well as how well the book enhances the understanding of the subject matter to a wider audience. And the panel of judges, most of whom are here with us tonight, so thank you for joining us, consists of Sheikh Mubarak Al-Abdallah Al-Mubarak Al-Sabah, Professor Carol Hillenbrand, Professor Emerita at the University of Edinburgh. Thank you, Carol. Professor Yasser Suleiman, formerly the Sultan Qaboos bin Said Professor of Modern Arabic Studies at the University of Cambridge, who's here. Thank you, Yasser. Sir Roger Tomkis, formerly Master of Pembroke College, Cambridge. Professor Charles Tripp, former Professor of Politics with reference to the Middle East at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. And Dr. Elizabeth Kendall, Mistress of Girton College, Cambridge. And myself, I'm the one that assesses whether the book's accessible or not, because those others are all on a higher plateau. I would like to thank all of the judges for their commitment and time, but I would also like to take this opportunity to offer a special thank you to Sir Roger Tomkis and to Charles Tripp, who will be stepping down from the panel of judges this year and have given us long and lengthy service, especially Sir Roger Tomkis, and we will miss them. But I'm happy to announce that Dr. Ali Ansari from the University of St Andrews will be joining the panel of judges in future. We thought there's a piece of this jigsaw that we don't talk about quite so much, which is the publishers. And they're very key, actually, and their decisions on why they publish a book, or whether to publish it in the first place or whether to submit it to our prize, are also very important. So we thought it might be interesting to have a few words this year from a publisher about what makes a good book, noting that a view of a publisher might not be the same as the panel judge. So it's my great pleasure to ask Nicola Ramsey, the Chief Executive of Edinburgh University Press, to say a few words and tell us what, in her view, makes a good book. Over to you, Nicola.
Thank you, Francis. Well, when Francis asked me to talk about what makes a prize-winning book, my first thought was that this would be easy. I was a commissioning editor for 25 years, so I've lived and breathed title selection for most of my working life. But actually pinning down the process of title selection proved to be trickier than I initially thought. And this is largely because a lot of it feels instinctive somehow. But I realized that saying that would make for a very short speech and really not be particularly enlightening for anyone. And of course, that instinct has to come from somewhere. It doesn't just lie dormant within a commissioning editor waiting to be unleashed. And so answering the question, what makes a prize-winning book, has led me to reflect on the role of the commissioning editor in academic publishing. Those of us lucky enough to have become commissioning editors recognise the responsibility we have for curating a list of books that will contribute in a meaningful way to their field, advancing knowledge and understanding. We're looking for world-class academic research in the subject areas in which we work that will provide new insights, perspectives, and ways of seeing and thinking about the world. Because of course, that is the beauty of the humanities, that it encourages critical thinking and opens minds. So commissioning editors are looking for expert voices that will stimulate ideas and will perhaps even be a catalyst for change. And crucially, we're looking for a diverse range of perspectives. We would be doing a disservice to our lists, our readers, and our potential authors if we continue to plough the same furrow, presenting a homogeneous view of the world and how to understand it. We therefore try to cast our net widely, attending international conferences, speaking with academics, doing interesting work in our subject areas, wherever they may be based, and ensuring that, for example, our series editorial boards provide expert advice, reflecting a broad range of background and experience. And this leads me neatly to the story I want to tell about spotting this particular prize-winning book that we're celebrating today. I developed a series with Professor Stephanie Cronin called Edinburgh Historical Studies of Iran and the Persian World, and we had put together a distinguished advisory board to provide peer oversight for the books proposed for the series. One of our advisory board members was Janet, who, in an email to me regarding a prospective book for the series, said, almost as an afterthought it seemed, "By the way, I was just going to write to you to propose a finished monograph by myself and Cameron, my brother, also involving art history. Should I send it to you?" And so, in August 2020, began my introduction to this wonderful book, Mullah Nasruddin, then called From Mullah to Goya. And instinctively, based on the description that Janet went on to share with me, alongside the draft introduction, I knew that this was an excellent book and that EUP was absolutely the right home for it. But what lay behind that instinct? Well, I probably would have subconsciously, perhaps rather than consciously, run through a mental checklist, which would have gone something like this. Does the book fit our list? In this case, that would have meant Islamic and Middle Eastern studies, where EUP has strengths in several subfields from classical Islam through to the present. A particular strength lies in the art and visual culture strand of that list. And Janet and Cameron's book really excited me because it was richly illustrated with high quality images, many in colour and many that have been hidden away in the archives. So yes, tick, it would fit our list. Does it present a unique idea, say something new and interesting, progress the field? Yes, the book is based on 2 decades of international archival research that has allowed the authors to tell a story not previously explored. So tick for that one. Is it broad-ranging, transcultural, comparative? Absolutely, it ranges widely across Iran and the South Caucasus region. Is it well written? Yes, I would say particularly well when considering this book is the product of 2 hands. Sometimes in such cases, the joins can be visible, but that is absolutely not the case here. Will EUP be able to do it justice in terms of production values? Yes, the authors had access to some funding, which enabled us to print in colour and on high quality art paper. And while the content is of course everything, I would hope that the end result, having been through the hands of EUP's excellent production team, will have contributed in some small way to making this a prize-winning book. And crucially, does the author seem responsive to feedback? Are they collaborative? Are they open? Yes, throughout the publishing process, Janet and Cameron shared their thoughts, listened to ideas, and very much worked in partnership with myself and my colleagues. So the book ticked all the boxes, which I think are what equated to my instinct that this would be a book that would enhance EUP's list and bring value to its readers. Now, of course, that wasn't the end of it. We're a university press and we have a robust review process to ensure every book we publish is of the highest academic standard. A commissioning editor's instinct is all well and good, but it needs to be tested. So the typescript was sent to 2 external readers in late 2020, both experts in the field, who confirmed that this was indeed a superb book which should absolutely be published. But that was not all. As a university press, we have a further round of consideration, this time with our press committee, a group of academics from the University of Edinburgh who represent the subject areas in which we publish. Each book we would like to commission requires the approval of that committee in order for the book to carry the university's name. Janet and Cameron's book went forward to the February 2021 meeting, where it was very warmly welcomed for publication. In fact, our subject expert went so far as to say, "This book looks like a winner." So even then, it appears we knew we had a potential prize-winning book on our hands. And so it has turned out to be. The book was published in late 2022 to positive reviews and now awards. While I knew we had something special on our hands, it is always wonderful when that is recognised in such a prestigious way. Whatever the magic dust or the X factor, however that may be defined, I think we can be confident that this book has it, and EUP has been tremendously proud to publish it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Nicola. There's not very much more to add to that, except that I would say, I'm going to show it, but you're going to show better illustrations later, that the judges were also absolutely universal in our decision that this was by far the book that shone above all the others that were presented to us this year. As you have so eloquently said, not only is it full of scholarship, bringing light to an understudied area, but it's also full of contemporary relevance and wonderful fun, as well as such profound academic study. But before we hear from the authors themselves, I would like to hand over to Sheikh Mubarak, who'd like to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Guy. First of all, may I just say I'm so delighted to see so many friends, past winners, colleagues, amongst us, even though we're a small number, but we are big at the heart. And I thank you all for attending, our scholarly event online, unfortunately. But I will, inshallah, we hope that we will make it up in the future and have the chance to meet so many dear, those friends, winners, and colleagues so if you don't mind, that was I just would like to say a few words on behalf of Dr. Saad Al-Sabah, and who is the patron of the British Kuwait Friendship Society, and myself. His Excellency Mr. Badr Mohammed Al-Awadi, the Ambassador of Kuwait to the United Kingdom, Ambassador Francis Guy, the chair of the panel of judges of the book prize, Sir Roger Tompkins, distinguished judges, distinguished scholars and dear friends and guests, ladies and gentlemen. Just allow me to start with a brief remark. As the majority are aware that this year, 2023, is the book prize's 25th year Silver Jubilee anniversary. Our plans were to hold a special event in Kuwait. However, there is a historic proverb that says, the wind does not blow as the ship's desire. Unfortunately so. This is a small reminder to us all that some circumstances are beyond human control and that we have to adapt to such circumstances. Moving on, I'm delighted to welcome you, albeit online, on behalf of the Abdullah Mubarak Al-Sabah Foundation to this year's British Kuwait Friendship Society Book Prize Awards. The British Kuwait Friendship Society Book Prize was founded in 1998 under the endowment of my late father, Sheikh Abdullah Mubarak Al-Sabah, and with the wise guidance of the serving and president and chair of the judges at the time, Sir Roger Tompkins. The prize is awarded for the best scholarly work on the Middle East in the English language. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish to extend a special thank you to everyone who took the time to submit for the 25th anniversary book prize, and special appreciation, of course, to our panel of judges. A special thank you and appreciation will be stepping down this year from the panel of judges, and also to Professor Tripp, who will likewise be stepping down this year from the panel of judges. So can we just have a round of applause to appreciate their, their contribution towards, making this happen, and all the academic scholarly been through. So proud to have at least last 25 years, which have been, and this is something I think for for scholarly endeavors for the Middle East and academia. And, I pay tribute to Sir Roger for his efforts in guiding us through the years. So as I mentioned, it was a privilege and honor to have an opportunity to have been working with you over the years. Thank you. Moreover, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome on board our two new judges, Dr. Elizabeth Kendall, the mistress of Girton College at the University of Cambridge, and Dr. Ali Ansari, or Professor Ali Ansari, Professor of History at St. Andrews University. I wish to congratulate you both on your appointment to serve as the newest members of the Judge Committee of the British Kuwait Friendship Society Book Prize. It's a great privilege to have with us, and with the wealth of knowledge, talent, and academic expertise that you will contribute to our judging. Furthermore, I would like to thank Francis and Mrs. Louise Hasey for their continuous and support prize this to happen, and especially this what has on the plan. We had to have the 25th anniversary, but due to the unfortunate that His Excellency Ambassador mentioned, was cancelled last few weeks ago. And I really appreciate their efforts and wish to thank them on behalf of myself and my family. Thank you very much. Also, a special thank you to Her Excellency, His Majesty's Ambassador Lewis, who was very grateful and gracious in giving us her beautiful garden at the embassy in Kuwait, which we were planning to arrange the event at, and she was very kind to have helped us and assisted wholeheartedly to give us the facility to be used for the event. We just thank her also on behalf of all of us. Last but not least, may I extend on behalf of all the judges our heartfelt congratulations to this year's book prize winners, Professor Janet Afari and Professor Kamran Afari, for the winning publication title, Mullah Nasr al-Din, The Making of a Modern Trickster from 1906 until 1911. This is a testament to your hard work, dedication, and talent. This is your momentous occasion that deserves to be celebrated, and I have no doubt that you will continue greater works in the future. And as we said, we have to meet each other, inshallah, very soon, either in the UK or in the USA, or hopefully one day maybe in the Middle East. And thank you very much for your contribution, and congratulations again for this joint effort and creating such a scholarly accomplishment. Once again, thank you all in this year's class. Looking forward to seeing you, inshallah, next year, hopefully, if all goes well, to reorganize this event in the future, maybe by next year as part of the 125th anniversary celebrations of the historical and bilateral relations between our two friendly countries, the State of Kuwait and the United Kingdom. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Sheikh Mubarak, and thank you for your generosity in continuing to support this fund through the Abdullah Al Mubarak Al Sabah Foundation. We're very conscious that without that generosity, we would not have had the 25 years of wonderful celebration. I'm going to hand straight over to Janet and Kamran because
judges.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start with brief comments and then hand it over to Janet as well too. So Janet and I are deeply honored to be the recipients of this cherished recognition, and we regret the tragic outbreak of war that made it impossible for us to meet in person. We hope that the book can contribute significantly to the affirmation of the rich history of diversity and collaboration among the people of the Middle East. Our sincere thanks to Sheikh Mubarak Abdullah Al Mubarak Al Sabah, whose sponsorship through the Abdullah Mubarak Foundation has made the prize possible. We'd like to acknowledge Dr. Swad Al Sabah for establishing this prestigious prize 25 years ago. We're grateful to Ambassador Frances Guy, the chair of the judges, and her entire dedicated panel for reading and selecting our book. A special thanks to Nicole Ramsey, of Edinburgh University Press, who commissioned the book originally and then shepherded it through the editorial process. And finally, I wish to thank Janet, my colleague and my sister, for inviting me to contribute to the writing and editing of this book after a decade of initiating the project with extensive research in Azerbaijan and Georgia. And with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Janet.
Thank you very much, everyone. I just want to reiterate everything that Kamran said with regard to our profound thanks for this truly, truly great honor. I just want to say one thing about Edinburgh University Press also. You realize we couldn't get this book published in the United States because it was so expensive. Every publisher we approached, I remember one asked for $75,000. It was finally, I'm just so grateful to Edinburgh University Press for taking up this book, because it certainly would not have been possible for us to come up with $75,000 to get the book published. So thank you very much again for that also. I'm going to start share screen here and maybe give you an overview of what the book is about, the legacy of Mullah Nasruddin. Okay, so the reinterpretation of myths and folklore has been an essential genre in literature. From the ancient Greek world to our contemporary societies, authors have reinterpreted old tales to forge new social criticisms. Our book, Mullah Nasruddin, The Making of a Modern Trickster, is a historical exploration of such a genre among Azerbaijani-speaking people of South Caucasus. The book looks at the milieu in which the periodical Mullah Nasruddin was born, the manner through which the journal reproduced the trickster trope of Nasruddin for its audience, and the influence of European graphic arts on its cartoons and illustrations. The key to this very successful cultural melange was the creative use of the trickster figure as a medium of social criticism. The traditional wise fool, which we know him in the Iranian, Turkish, Arab world by various names, Hoja Nasruddin, Goha or Joha, or Mullah Nasruddin, broke conventional boundaries of thought and morality. It revealed the hypocrisy of the existing social reality, ridiculed the overbearing theologian, the conceited scholar, the lazy aristocrat, and the autocratic king. So using the tropes of the folk Mullah Nasruddin, with which every child is familiar in the Middle East, the periodical Mullah Nasruddin also brought down to earth and debased powerful contemporary figures, creating space for new ways of thinking about relations of power in society. Now, the region we're talking about on the left, you see, is the South Caucasus. It used to be part of the Safavid Empire until 1722, and then became part of the Russian Empire. And today on the right, you see it comprises the countries of Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, as well as parts of South Russia. Russian colonialism differs from its British and French counterparts in some very important ways, other than the fact that they had been in close proximity, the Russians and the Middle Eastern people, so they knew each other pretty well. The Tsarist Russia settled on a policy of religious toleration towards each minority community in its empire, instead of forced religious conversion or expulsion. But they also set up an elaborate administrative system to employ and control the religious establishments. So in the Muslim world, administrative officers work closely with Muslim clerics to implement Sharia law in family matters, and in the process had created what Robert Cruz has called an Islamic church for the Shia Azerbaijanis, which historically did not have a centralized doctrinal authority. Now, of course, Muslims, Jews, and other non-Christians were considered third-class citizens after Russian Orthodox Christians and Catholics and Protestant denominations. The Russians saw the Muslim population as exotic, backward, and even dangerous, as people who needed to be disciplined and educated by the state. So we can use terms like Orientalist and colonialist to refer to the conduct of the Tsarist authorities. But the Muslims in this region were not powerless subjects of the state. By 1905, there were a number of extremely wealthy, cosmopolitan Muslim industrialists in Baku who wholeheartedly supported the prospect of religious and educational reform in the region. They established their own newspapers and journals, theaters with a strong group of playwrights, multiple charitable societies, private schools for girls, as well as many other modern institutions. This cultural renaissance was an indigenous movement and by no means a colonial enterprise. Indeed, Tsarist regime was reluctant to support these efforts at religious reform, especially the education of Muslim girls, because it feared the backlash by the Muslim clerics with which it worked closely. Now, in 1906, a group of artists and intellectuals published the journal Mullah Nasruddin. They reinterpreted the tales of the Middle Eastern trickster to construct a progressive anti-colonial discourse with a strong emphasis on social, political, and religious reforms. The founder and editor of Mullah Nasruddin was Jalil Mehmet Qolizadeh. He is commonly known as Mirza Jalil. He was an Azerbaijani educator, a teacher, and a playwright. His wife, Hamida Khanum Javanshir, was an early Azerbaijani feminist and a philanthropist. There were a number of gifted contributors on the staff. Ali Akbar Tahirzadeh Behzad was a brilliant poet who revolutionized Azerbaijani literature. Abdurrahim Beg Haqverdiyev was a playwright and stage director and a member of the first State Duma of the Russian Empire. Mehmet Said Urdubadi was a prolific correspondent and writer who covered the revolutionary events in Iran during the Tabriz Civil War of 1908. The principal artists were Oskar Schmerling, Joseph or Yusuf Roter, and Azim Azimzadeh, who together were co-founder of the art of caricature in South Caucasus and Iran. And the journal is considered a founder of a satirical school of thought in Azerbaijani literature. By using folklore, visual art, and satire, their 8 to 12 page weekly, which had full-page color lithographic cartoons, reached tens of thousands of people across the Muslim world, impacting the thinking of a generation. The most creative period of the journal were the years 1906-12, when a highly talented group of artists, writers, and poets were staff members. And these were the years that coincided with the Iranian constitutional revolution and also the Young Turk movement, events that were reflected in the journal. The 1880s oil boom in Baku and the spurt of industrialization in certain parts of the Caucasus brought European and American investors, as well as migrant workers from Iran and the Ottoman Empire to the region, leading to significant economic growth. As more wealth was generated, economic inequity of the region widened, particularly in the city of Baku. New political parties were formed, especially various social democratic organizations affiliated with the Russian Social Democratic Workers' Party, both the Bolshevik and the Menshevik branches of it. Tiflis, where the journal was published, was the administrative and cultural capital of Tsarist Russia's southwestern peripheries, and it was a magnet for artists. A majority of his residents were Armenians with large numbers of Georgians and Russians, but the city also had a small Shia Muslim population, They were both long-term Caucasus Azerbaijanis and migrant workers from Iran. It was a vibrant center of politics, an eclectic cosmopolitan city where artists, playwrights, and journalists of these diaspora communities interacted and added to the city's cultural diversity. Mullah Nasruddin soon captured the imagination of a wide sector of the Muslim world. Historians of South Caucasus and Iran have called the birth of the journal a historic moment in the annals of the region. In its first year of publication, Mullah Nasruddin had a circulation of 25,000, of which 15,000 were subscribers inside Iran. With its large circulation, it reached a much wider audience in the coffee shops and bazaars of South Caucasus, Iran, the Ottoman Empire, and as far away as Egypt and India. It was read aloud in these spaces to diverse groups, including many illiterate urban workers and rural peasants. And we have stories about peasants coming and asking somebody in the city to read them something they found in the journal that they were just absolutely mesmerized with. The periodical faced immediate and implacable opposition. South Caucasus and Iranian clerics issued fatwas against the journal. Still, it was smuggled across the border into Iran and other countries. Mirza Jalil's brother and other staff members routinely crossed the border to Iran. They distributed the periodical in Tabriz during the Civil War and in the trenches. They had also had embedded reporters who covered the Constitutional Revolution and the Tabriz resistance of 1908-09 from the ground. I would like to emphasize that the journal was not anti-religious. It was the first publication in the Shia Muslim world to unapologetically reinterpret Quranic verses in light of modern social norms, including girls' education and a greater reform in marriage and divorce laws. So you find articles and cartoons, opposition to child marriage and forced marriage, for example, this one, easy male divorce laws, polygamy, this one, for example, man taking a new wife, temporary marriage, known as sighe or mut'ah in the region, pedophilia were among many of the topics that the journal addressed. Mullah Nasruddin called for freedom, justice, and constitutionalism. So if you see with the banners here, Hurriyat, Idalat, Qanun Asasi. Many writers of Mullah Nasruddin worked with the Social Democratic Himmat Party, Muslim Social Democratic Himmat Party. And they were committed to his platform of fighting for social reform and against political despotism and religious orthodoxy. In the pages of the journal, we see many criticisms of sacrosanct Shi'i rituals, particularly self-flagellation, Sinazani, during the festival of Muharram. So this one is our nation's army. So this is a cleric and the self-flagellants, and then the Russians' army at the top, for example. They have many things like that. The artists of the periodical played a crucial role in its success. They mingled modernist and social democratic artistic influences with older humanist traditions of classical Persian poetry, creating a new cultural and artistic discourse. Their goal was to highlight the violence and hypocrisy of the European powers and to critique indigenous social and cultural practices. So here, Satan, this is Satan, who is European politics, is enticing the people of the region to push the wool of their livelihood into a valley to be carved up by these imperialist powers down here. Tiflis was quite an interesting city at the time. You had German, Polish, and ethnic Russian artists coming there, and they played an important role in the artistic renaissance of the city. They taught painting, drawing, sculpture, and architecture at Tiflis art schools. And then the local artists were inspired by these European artistic conventions. Gradually, we see a triangular relationship. Students start attending the Tiflis Fine Arts Society. If they're good, they go to the St. Petersburg Academy of the Arts. If they're better, they go to the Munich Academy of Arts in Germany. So Schmerling, one of our principal artists, studied in all of these three schools, and then he met Rotter at the Munich Academy and invited him to come. The graphics and cartoons of Mullah Nasruddin belong to a tradition of satirical arts that stretch back to 18th and 19th century European lithographic art, especially influenced by the Spanish artist Francisco José de Goya and the French artist Honoré Daumier. But they also drew upon newer forms of caricature in British, German, and Russian satirical publications, and the critical realist school of art, which was just developed in Tiflis and St. Petersburg. So the first one on the left you see is a classic work of Goya, and the right is from the journal Mullah Nasruddin, very similar things. Now, European conventions of caricature were problematic. They were based on many racist, sexist, and Orientalist views of the East, and involved the pseudoscience of physiognomy, which is the melding of human and animal features in discussing the characteristics of different nations into their cartoons. So here you have a cartoon from the British Punch. This is on 1882 after the Urabi Revolt and British occupation of Egypt. And you see various countries represented by animals. So the lion is always Britain, the bear is usually, they're always the Russian, and the crocodile here is Egypt. The idea behind physiognomy was that one's appearance determined one's character. So those endowed with European definitions of beauty were seen as inherently ethical and moral, but people with physical deformities or unattractive features were seen as morally corrupt. Satirical and illustrated European journalists, including the British Punch, used elements of physiognomy to suggest that there was a racial hierarchy among nations and people. Now, Mullah Nasruddin also used physiognomy, but the application of physiognomy here was along ideological rather than racial lines. Clerics, merchants, and political leaders and traditional women who opposed modern education were drawn with typically unflattering features such as angry eyes, long noses, and animal features, suggesting they were conceited, corrupt, uneducated, and generally untrustworthy. So for example, here to see how they were inspired, on the left, we have a cartoon from the British Punch. Prime Minister Gladstone and the Women's Federation is the subject of the cartoon. On the right, you see a similar theme, but here we have a Qazvin cleric and his many temporary wives. So you can see the influence, but you can see how they dramatically change it and reinterpret it. Now, success has many claimants. The Azerbaijan Republic celebrates the periodical as a founding contributor to modern Azerbaijani nationalism. Iranian historians also claim the periodical as, quote, one of their own, because many members of the editorial board came from immigrant Iranian families, and because there was a large volume of articles and graphics about Iran in the periodical. And the Georgian Republic also has a claim on Mullah Nasruddin because it was published in Tbilisi. And of course, it's two of its main artists were Georgian Germans. But in reality, we argue that Mullah Nasruddin belonged to a transnational diasporic society. In this region, Russians, Caucasus Azerbaijanis, Georgians, German, Armenians, Iranians, Jews, and other ethnicities of a variety of religions, cultures, and political persuasions mingled on a daily basis and shared the common territory. Indeed, the theme of diaspora, of living in transition between cultures, of crossing border is a very prominent one in Mullah Nasruddin. Many things like this one, crossing of the Aras River, going back and forth. Now, as a transnational periodical, Mullah Nasruddin never limited itself to the local concerns of the Muslim Azerbaijanis. Rather, from the very beginning, Mullah Nasruddin saw itself as a mouthpiece for other persecuted Muslim populations and even other colonized people around the globe. The editor and several writers of the periodical grew up in Azerbaijani-speaking Shia communities with strong affinities to Iran. And so we can't think of a journal as a transnational diasporic periodical in Azerbaijani that was heavily influenced by Iranian culture and social practices. But there were others influences. Like many other diasporic communities, the writers of Mullah Nasruddin felt torn between their close ties, religious, cultural, and ethnic ties to Iran, their desire to assert their Azerbaijani language and cultural heritage, and the need to further assimilate within the greater Russian society to succeed professionally. And so this feeling of in-betweenness, of wanting so deeply and passionately to belong to one place or the other, and yet finding there really was no one place where could one find oneself at home, vividly comes through in many columns and poems. And here you have the Azerbaijani who's forced to speak these various languages, Arabic and Turkish and Russian. And he says, you know, I've got my own language too. There were other transnationals. The associate editor, Omar Faik, had strong ties to Turkey, where his family was from and where he had studied. He'd been involved with the Ottoman constitutionalists, and he was an experienced journalist. And still others, the artist Oskar Schmerling, who grew up in a Georgian German community in Tbilisi, went to Munich, as I said, and studied there, and Joseph Rotter, who was a newer immigrant, a German Jew, who came also from Germany to Tbilisi and became part of the editorial board. So the preoccupation of the journal with the migrants was not due to any intimate familial ties. Rather, it stemmed from their social democratic political leanings and cultural ties, as well as their longing and sentimental attachment to their Iranian heritage. In its most creative 6 years, we discussed in the journal, the editorial board wrote about 4 major political events: the Russian Revolution of 1905-06, which brought a constitutional reform and a free press; the Armenian Muslim Wars of 1905-07, which saw the devastation and pillage of hundreds of Armenian and Azerbaijani villages; the Iranian Constitutional Revolution, which brought a parliament and constitution to Iran for the first time; and the Young Turk Revolution, which restored the Ottoman constitution. All of these events were discussed and analyzed in the pages of the journal. Finally, Mullah Nasruddin lived through World War I, the 1917 Russian Revolution, endured the Russian Civil War, when briefly the editor came to Iran for about a year and published it there, and then returned back. It joined the Azerbaijan Democratic Party, Mirza Jalil, and finally lived through the establishment of the Soviet Union. But as the authority of Joseph Stalin, also from Tiflis, grew more draconian in the late 1920s, the fate of the contributors to the periodical was sealed. The Central Committee of the Azerbaijan Communist Party decided that the periodical would now be called Allahsiz and become the organ of the League of Atheists, Allahsizlar Ittifaqin Oqanina. And as you can imagine, what that did to the journal, which had been so very, very careful with issues of religion. Mirza Jalil died of natural causes in 1932, but with a broken heart. Soon after the name change, Hamida Khanum, his wife, lived on through great hardship, but she wrote her memoir of their remarkable life, and it's one of the few documents we have actually on their personal lives. Some of the writers perished in the turbulent 1930s. Some remained quiet. Some became propagandists for the Stalinist regime to survive. A few tried to protest, and as a result faced brutal years or death in the labor camps of the Gulag. Still, the lasting legacy of Mullah Nasruddin is with us. The journal exposed the colonial and imperialist policies of the great powers in the region. It called for greater dialogue and friendship between rival ethnic and religious communities, so the Shias and Muslims, the Armenians, for example, and Muslims, the Armenians and Azerbaijanis, and so forth. It defied the Shia Muslim religious establishment in South Caucasus, Iran, Najaf, and argued for a more progressive interpretation of Islam, opposed, for example, anti-Semitism in the region, among others. It chastised the landowning elites of the region and became a mouthpiece for the impoverished. It initiated a radical discourse on gender reform and called attention to the plight of women and children. And so for all these accomplishments, Mullah Nasruddin will forever be considered a true literary gem of the early 20th century. And I'm very pleased to let you know that BBC Persian just produced a documentary mainly based on our book, for which was aired this fall, and I have a little clip of it which I can't show, but it's hopefully they will also produce it in English because all the interviews were actually done in English. So I hope that in this way the journal would actually become more available to a much wider audience. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Cameron. You can see why just in that eloquent telling of a few 100-page book, Janet managed to weave the story for us. I'm very happy to spend the last few minutes with some questions from others if they have them, but I have one that I really need to ask Janet because she's told the story of the book. She's told us why we might be fascinated to read it, but she hasn't told us why and how she started on the journey with the book. What started you off with this 20 years, I believe it was, at least, of
At
research
least.
and writing?
So, you know, growing up in Iran, Kamran and I were, of course, totally immersed in the folk character, Mullah Nasruddin. I mean, that's young people know that better than any religious text, I should say. So, and the stories are there, and the cartoons were there. The cartoons, we didn't know they were from the journal Mullah Nasruddin. After finishing, when I was working on my first book, which is a study of the social history of the Iranian constitutional revolution, I came across a reference to the journal Mullah Nasruddin over and over. And I think in that book, I actually for myself was able to convince myself how suddenly after a decade of pan-Islamism, Iran has a revolution where the dominant thinking is social democratic. I mean, how do you move from you know, Al-Afghani to social democracy? And it was clear the influence was coming from the north. What I couldn't convince myself at the time was, but how did they become so successful? In other words, how do you take an ideology like social democracy and disseminate it to such an extent so that, you know, it becomes something that even your peasants are talking about working on? And so that meant really, I did a second book with John Perry where we published in English the writings of Ali Akbaradi Khuda, who in Iran had tried to do something like what Mullah Nasruddin was doing. And also enormously important, that journal also. But then it involved really learning the Azerbaijani language to be able to tackle this book. I started an exchange program with in Baku for my university at the time, Purdue University. We were bringing, I started basically a women's studies program in Khazar University. And through that, I was able to build the connections to be able to reach the archives because they're really hard to get to, even, you know, after the fall of the Soviet Union, it's still hard to get to the Tsarist regimes. And then was able to put together gradually a team of collaborators when I went to Georgia also, and then I traveled to Iran again during the Khatami period and was able to, you know, put this team together where we kind of were able to, it was just a real, you know, puzzle. And I was like putting these pieces together. And finally, I had 2 sabbaticals that I spent studying art history to be able to just like kind of figure this out, because I don't have a training in art history, you know, and it was something that I had to learn. But I'm very pleased that you're happy with the results.
I don't think we can't not be. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a few more minutes, and we have some very learned people in the audience. I'm sure some would like to ask a question. Charles.
Excellency Francis, can I ask a question?
Yeah, of course, Sheikh Mubarak, please. Sorry, no, sorry,
Ambassador.
Beg your
I'm
pardon.
sorry. Thank you very much, Ms. Janet Afri. Thank you very much for your presentation. Really, it's interesting. What interesting me is because I have a lot of other Azerbaijani, you know, friends around the world, and I always talk to them, and always fascinate me the way they present sometimes their culture and the tolerance of religious, even though you see them, yeah, like that's what first notice when I sit with them. I can sit with Shia, or can sit with who's not Muslim or Christian, but still they're proud about the variety and the, you know, the tolerance they have in religious. I think your book will reflect that. I think I didn't read it yet, but I hope I have a copy of it. But in my experience with my friends, the Azari, they're really proud about their tolerance regarding the religious, and that's why make them special in my view, and especially in that time. I think, as I said in the beginning, your book is time is very important. Is very important, especially when you tackle some part of religious. That's how they live together in one city, and I hope, I don't know about the book, if they reflect that tolerance among the Adari. Thank you very much.
Yes, very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Yes.
Charles, would you like to ask something?
Yes, I'd just like to add my congratulations to both of you for such a superb book. I mean, really wonderful, readable, funny, illuminating. The question I wanted to ask, which is the picture that you draw of Tiflis at that time, is such an interesting one in terms of the cosmopolitan society, but also quite surprising for me. I don't know the period very well. The degree of toleration of the authorities for such a subversive publication. And I was going to ask you whether in your research you had any echo of how the Russian authorities dealt with, because they were critiquing social aspects. So you can imagine some Russians would be quite happy to see those critiqued. But at the other hand, they were also criticizing socioeconomic inequalities, greedy landowners, authoritative police, police. So there's some sense of which there's a space there. And I think it'd be interesting to hear something about that, because on either end, you get the, what happens when he takes it to Iran? Well, there's a much more ruthless centralizing regime. And of course, when he goes back to the Soviet Union, it's even more ruthless and centralizing, and it disappears. So there's an extraordinary moment there.
Right. That's because the Tsarist regime's policy of assimilation wasn't just based on coercion, but it was also based on education and cooptation. And Vorontsov, for example, as the governor, realized that theater would be a fantastic medium through which they could assimilate the population. And initially they started with Russian theater, but then they realized nobody was coming, so they encouraged Georgians and Armenians and Muslims to produce their own theater. And so theater begins to address these social issues. And yes, there is actually quite a bit of tolerance in terms of these issues. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes you see that the cartoons, there's a big cross, and it says that at the last minute, the state said that we cannot publish this particular cartoon. So sometimes it isn't. The other thing is that he had actually quite an interesting background, Jalil Mamad Qulizadeh. At a certain point, he worked as a police officer. So he knew everybody in the authorities. And I think when they went to get permission for the journal, Omar Faik, who was his co-editor, was known as a radical and somebody who had fought in Turkey. So he didn't go to get permission for the journal. Mirza Jalil went to get permission for the journal, although they're both really collaborators on this. So he kind of knew the system, had come up in the system, educated in the system, but also knew the authorities. And I think there was a certain level of tolerance on that too.
Thank you. Mark, you put something in the chat, but I'd be very happy if you want to raise the question yourself. You would express it better than I can.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I wanted to ask the authors, so congratulations to the authors this year. I wanted to ask if and how this book speaks to the importance of journalism and communication in the Middle East and around the world, and what possibilities the authors see for the future of this kind of educated journalism like Mullah Nasruddin in the Middle East and elsewhere.
So I'll let Kamran answer that one.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm a drama therapist. I teach performance and theater classes, and I had an opportunity last year for a workshop on satire to introduce some of the ideas of the book. And even though the students are mostly from Los Angeles, they're very different time and place, but the enduring lesson of the book and some of the themes that came out about satire, the importance of satire at the core of drama, and the power that it has, not just to ridicule oppressive individuals and groups or institutions, but to instigate a kind of a live hope for future change, for positive change. The fact that people, interreligious, interethnic groups could come together and pose these questions, address the complexities of colonial empires and their revolutions and all of that. I think that really, resonated with them as well. So I think in that sense, the work of the journal and that history can really help us understand, how some of the challenges that we face today, we can work around as well.
Thank you. I mean, I have to say that satire was my first introduction as a political officer in the embassy in Khartoum. The power of satire in the Sudanese press was incredible at the time, and that influence has always stayed with me. So that's why I find it so contemporary. And some of the cartoons on women's rights, for example, they could be up there on the posters now, today, absolutely. Regrettably, nothing's changed.
Regrettably,
Yes. Does anyone else have a burning question they would like to ask, seeing as we have the pleasure of having these wonderful authors with us? No, it's the problem with not being in person, because we would have time for a chat later. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Sheikh Mubarak, for
thank you very much. Each and every one of you, thank you very much, really. I look forward to seeing you in the near future.
And many congratulations again to Janet and Kamran for such a wonderful piece of work. And I hope you will all take the opportunity to read it. Really, honestly, it's worth carrying on air journeys with you. I tell you, it's very good for a long flight. It's very beautiful. I had all my fellow people sitting next to me looking at the cartoons with me. So thank you for that joyful moment too. And thank you very much for joining us this evening. And thank you, Louise, for making all of this happen. As always, without your hard work, we wouldn't be here. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Louise. I should thank Louise also very much for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.